So I'm going to say a massive welcome to Learning at Large. Thank you for joining me, Neil.
Thank you for having me.
And let's start where most things should start, which is with an introduction. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I am currently the Chief Learning Officer for Deloitte Canada and Chile, and with a mandate from our board to build better humans, which I'm enjoying immensely, and I look forward to talking more about with you.
Brilliant. Not a small order either. Um, so in your opinion, and to kick things off, if learning programs could feel like anything in the world, what do you think they should feel like?
Without being too pithy, I think they should feel a bit like home. Um, I have a deep sense of connection with the fact that learning is an innately human event that takes place, and that being in an environment where you can learn and be, whether it's socially or personally, that it's something we should find a deep connection with from our soul. So it's less even about our brains, but also about just deeply connecting with who we are as humans, and that learning is a key component of that.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think we're going to dive into those ideas a little bit more as we talk in this podcast.
Uh, Looking forward to it.
And what about yourself? When you think about learning that you've experienced yourself, then what stuck with you personally? What was that learning and why do you think it made an impact on you?
Well, from at the I started my career as a church pastor. So for 11 years, I was a pastor. Um, and the biggest impact on me was the shift from that type of work and helping people through their spiritual journeys to moving into the corporate world. And the pivot in the learning that happened there was deeply personal and fraught with all kinds of sort of figuring out who I wanted to be and my sense of purpose in that. And so learning has always had this deep connection for me in terms of deeper than just adding skills, but more about who do I want to be and what kind of contribution do I want to give back. So every piece of learning has some form of a connection to that journey and my sense of purpose as well.
And that makes a lot of sense from your previous answer as well, right? Um, so today we're going to talk a little bit about why you think that the efficiency is kind of failing L&D. If I can get you just to kind of pitch that idea to us in 30 seconds or around that, what could you tell us about that piece of thought?
Yeah, and it sounds like a provocative statement, but I think the business expectation of learning, and I think this is a shared mission between three parties. Oftentimes, it's the individual themselves, the business, and the needs that they have for skills and capabilities to deliver on the strategy, and then the L&D team, who have for many years, I think, faced this idea of being an order taker from the business. And our efficiency in L&D and the learning operations side of the business has always been geared to serve that need, less so the actual experience and more the delivery of content. So we've optimized efficiency in content delivery, but not necessarily in the development of skills, which is different than just taking a course and sitting in a classroom, for example. So that means, if we step back and open the aperture on skills get developed through experiences, exposure, and education being that smaller piece of it, the experience and exposure component of our development of skills is very inefficient from an L&D design perspective. And so as we're starting to learn more and more about what does good look like, we realize we have to design that entire spectrum, not just the education component, to truly get at the development of skills.
Okay.
That plus an ever evolving technology platform that for many it's duct tape and baling wire, with costs driving down the ability to truly get the tools and stitch the data flow from a learning perspective through the system, linking it to talent metrics and business metrics. All of that's been woefully inefficient over the years and hard to do the true storytelling that a trusted learning advisor needs to be able to do. So lots of places for improvement in that world. And I'm not a huge believer that tech answers all problems. I think it's a deeper issue around process and valuing what learning brings to the table as well. So that's been very inefficient in terms of how we've told the story, and then therefore how the business really looks at what learning brings to the equation.
Well, let's open up then a little bit more about what you think, learning is. So I think you've already mentioned that you think it's kind of like a natural state for humans to grow. That is kind of what they do. And you talked about learning being like coming home earlier.
Mhm.
So how does that belief shape your approach at Deloitte, for example?
Yeah, and that natural state really is anchored in all living things in their most natural state are designed to grow. And so if they're not growing, then it typically means that something in the environment, if it's a plant, then maybe it's the pH value of the soil or that's not getting enough sunlight or whatever it is. Um, Whoever's tending the garden, so to speak, is really tasked with trying to remove those things that are limiting growth. And I think that's been really the focus for me at Deloitte is as much as we think about learning as humans being adding to, I think there's a big part of the learning sphere and what a chief learning officer's job is to remove things as well. So there's unlearning, and there are a lot of things around removing distractions, removing blockers from the ability to learn, including the way we design learning and designing learning for the brain, not just for the efficiency of delivery and trying to get everything into an hour. Sometimes that's not the right time frame for the brain to actually absorb these things. So we're learning more and more about what that looks like, and it's exciting to see the impact once we understand how we interact as humans and how the brain actually processes data that comes in from a learning perspective. That's all part of what this natural state and putting people in the best possible environment to learn means.
Okay, and I think we'll kind of unpick this maybe as we go through a bit more.
Sure.
But to you, what does the kind of whole person development look like? You've talked about how it goes sometimes beyond the interventions or the learning that might be given to them, or beyond maybe looking at the skills or performance gaps. What does that really mean? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so there's two sort of angles I'll take to this. One is the developing the whole person in terms of not just for our context, not just developing the Deloitte practitioner, but actually the full human. And that means we have skills and capabilities that are outside of perhaps even what our current job requires us to do, or even our current company requires us to do. And when we do that, when we honor those things, we find and stay curious, we find new capabilities, new skills that actually have tangential impact on building the scaffolding that can help us to learn faster and deliver differently with divergent thinking. So, for example, we launched a while back something called Chef School. So we had our practitioners send in videos of why they would love to learn how to become a better chef in their spare time. And this was a Deloitte um, initiative done because we did believe in developing the whole person. So if you have a real passion for something and we're able to feed that, your growth mindset is fed and it has spillover effect into other areas, which I'll touch on probably a little bit later. But that's one part of developing the whole human is offering programs that are outside of the spectrum of the typical Deloitte practitioner. So we have chef school, mechanics class, improv classes, these types of things that are a lot of fun for people to engage in as humans, not necessarily as Deloitte practitioners.
You know that the expectations for lunch meetings at Deloitte have just gone absolutely sky high now, and people will be thinking,
Yeah, or
what am I going to
and or
get?
e- and or even weekends. I think people love to go to these programs on the weekend, which tells us something, right?
Yeah.
Um, the other aspect of that whole human is thinking about, again, back to how does our brain actually work, and letting people develop outside of the classroom. We've always had apprenticeship as part of a core, the main way that we deliver development opportunities is through those experiences that you get. So less and less classroom intervention and more empowering and working with our businesses on curating these experiences for learning, not
Mhm.
just for delivery of outcomes. And so treating people not like machines, but actually like humans who are developing skills and getting opportunities and experiences that they can then scaffold and layer into their development planning. So, getting very intentional about the experiences and the exposure to ideas and coaches, et cetera, that help really layer on and multifaceted approach to developing the same skills through
Mhm.
intention, as opposed to expecting people to come to a class and become magically delicious as a result of what they experience in that room. So honoring the fact that we as humans need more than just a funnel put on our head and information poured in.
And you've mentioned a little bit about, you mentioned the brain and understanding a bit of the science of what's going on. Um, and I think you've been experimenting a bit with that and with cognitive psychology as well in your learning design. So is there something more you could tell us about what you've been doing there and, maybe where you've seen that make a difference, I guess, what impact that's had?
Yeah, in good Alice in Wonderland, it's a rabbit hole I've gone down, and it's opened up a whole new world, personally, for sure. So been working with a couple of partners through this process, plus spending more and more time with neuroscientists, understanding again some of the impact of research that's come to light in the last 10 years, technology that's made it possible to explore these things differently, um, and people who have been able to translate it into the learning world, not just into medical experimentation. So one of those organizations is Dr. Paul Zach's team, who are working on, they've released something called the Six app, SIX. It enables you through a smartwatch to actually, their algorithm actually tracks when dopamine and oxytocin fire through the brain, through down the vagal nerve. And when you can track that, why that's important is the realization that when dopamine and oxytocin fire at the same time, whatever's going on at that moment is written, for lack of a better way of sharing, sort of on the supercomputer instead of the floppy disk. So whatever's you experience at that moment, the brain says something rather special just took place. I need to recall that. And it goes written in a different place. If just dopamine fire and you really are having a great time learning, but it's only dopamine, it's written on the floppy disk. The problem with that floppy disk is that it's erased every night when you go to bed, and it's not available for recall later down the line. So learning what works in terms of making this dopamine oxytocin fire versus just a dopamine experience has been really fascinating. We have our folks opt in to wearing and turning on the app, and we can tile people's experiences. They can actually watch each other's brain waves and biomarkers through that experience. And we can see then, as an instructor, you can map your agenda and see at the end of the day which components of the agenda actually generated the kind of brain activity that tells you they're going to recall that, and we can play down the road on drawing on that versus areas of the agenda that we probably will need to revisit because it didn't resonate in the way we needed to. So that's one of the avenues we've been exploring. The other is the real power through Peter Gabriel and his daughter Anna Gabriel launched a company called Reverberation. which working with neuroscientists at Stanford has been finding out the power of music on the brain and the use of music for things like binding, where you can bind learning objectives to sound or to music for recall. So when you, it's the whole construct around Pavlov's dog, when the bell rings, the dog does what you ask it to do. We as humans are really motivated by music and can use music to recall. You probably can think of a song yourself right now that when you hear that song, it takes you back through all of your senses. Your visual cortex pictures you there. You can almost smell being there. For me, it's the song Drive by the Cars. It transports me right back to Pacific Coast Highway during my college days back in California. And I can smell the ocean, feel the sand, and it just takes me right back. So we've been testing the use of music and binding learning objectives in some of our account teams to recall key concepts for months later after strategy sessions, for example. So they stay front of center when the music is played. So it's borderline brain control manipulation, but it's really fascinating to see how the brain actually works and things that work in terms of recall and helping sort through build memory better, etc.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess you use the word experiment, right? Because I was thinking, can you imagine if all of the learning interventions that are kind of created for people all had music for each objective inside it, then you can almost have a cacophony of sound like being played at any one moment in somebody's life. But I guess you're
Yeah,
experimenting to see the impact rather than saying, hey, this is
correct.
what we're always going to do. And as you said, it requires replaying that music later, which has practical implications, I guess, as well. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's
I
more.
try not to think of Clockwork Orange, but there's a little bit, a little bit
Yeah,
of like how to
yeah.
be
I mean, I
thinking
think
of
I
that.
think absolutely all of these things could be used for good or for evil. I think for sure. I think the more interesting. I mean, I love that our people are willing to be guinea pigs, first of all, because it's an opt-in
Hmm.
piece. There's another very cool pilot that we're doing where at the beginning of every learning session, we can tile up what brainwave people are on. You used to have the headset on to do this, right? Well, now we actually don't need that. You can actually tile it up using smartwatches and algorithms and apps that do this. But to be able to see what brainwave everyone in the classroom is on, and then through sound, align those brainwaves quickly to a theta, beta, whatever brainwave we think is the best starting place for whatever particular learning it is. That people are fascinated to watch their own tile, but also everyone else's
Mm.
sort of start in different places and then align. And it takes about 30 seconds for sound to actually align our brainwaves and then deliver content. Imagine as a facilitator knowing everyone's on the same brainwave length because we never come into a room in that space.
Hmm.
And we have often used icebreaker activities, et cetera, that are attempting to get people into the to be present. But the fact that it can be done through sound very quickly and you can see it happen and know
Hmm.
when it's happened really does open up, um, as efficient as effective as I think AI will be at redefining how learning gets done. I actually think the understanding of these concepts is even more impactful to the future of learning,
Yeah,
and how
it's
we'll actually
interesting.
think about learning design.
We talk about, you need to be intrinsically motivated, right, to learn something. How you get to that point, you could include or exclude from your learning design, I guess. But
Mhm.
I guess what you're kind of experimenting with is how to get someone learning ready, able or in
Yeah,
the right mindset, even, open-mindedly ready, very reflectively ready to learn. And whether that's
yeah,
to do with the brainwave or whether it's to do with the fact that they are literally tuning themselves in to the fact that we're all in a room and let's see what happens when we try to learn, and they're kind of being open to it. It's an interesting experiment, I guess.
yeah. I mean, I think we've always known. the most effective learning experiences are when people have set intention at the
Hmm.
beginning and then have time for reflection. And the brain research is showing us what's
Hmm.
actually going on when that happens.
Yeah.
So this is a form of setting intention,
Hmm.
less about what I intend to learn and more about how I intend to learn, which I think creating a brain friendly, when I talk about our most natural state, it's trying to get to that place of understanding what is the most natural state for learning and how do you get the pH level of the soil to the right level for us as humans. And so I think it's fascinating the more we understand and the more um, we get to a place where we can truly design for that experience.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you talked earlier about, how L&D is often chasing efficiency. Um, and you've already mentioned the idea of, trying to kind of design really for humans and whole humans and put them at the center. Are these kind of experiments the way you're doing that, or is there other ways that you're kind of going about that?
Yeah, so we started, I just want to nuance a bit. Chasing efficiency has probably been L&D's downfall because I think we need to stay focused on effective, not efficient. So some of the best learning experiences are the least efficient. They're really clunky, but they
Hmm.
make a real impact on what people remember. So efficiency for the sake of efficiency is I think the wrong focus. So these things, for example, this experimentation, the first few times we tried to do it were the least efficient thing I've ever seen in a classroom. But they were aimed at getting, in the long term. And I do think that's the view from a learning perspective is you have to look at this not through efficiency of the process that's in the classroom or even efficiency of design, et cetera, but much more efficiency from the starting place of a human to the ending place of that development of skill at whatever level we're looking at. That process, can you hack time to competence? These types of things are what we're looking at in terms of is there a proven, repeatable, scalable way to give people a better state to learn
Hmm.
um, on things that traditionally have been very ineffective or very difficult to develop. And the one that's where we're doing most of this testing is in the enduring human capabilities. Like we're all curious, but can we build our curiosity to another level? Uh,
Hmm.
can we grow critical thinking skills faster than we have in the past? And how does that impact our ability for example, practitioners who come into our firm as business analysts to grow to be consultants, senior
Hmm.
consultants, managers, senior managers? Can they grow at a pace that's been far faster than previous because we've been able to design a much more effective process at getting them the experiences that they require to develop the skills and move quicker through. So it's the efficiency of that entire development process from business analyst through to partner that would really yield the benefit, not necessarily efficiency of just any particular course or any particular delivery.
It's interesting because they are the complex skills, right? And they're also the ones that are listed in the skills that are going to be needed alongside tech skills and
Yeah.
working with AI.
And
The
traditionally
human
the
skills.
hardest to measure,
Yeah.
right? Um, in terms of especially in our business where everything needs to have data to prove it. Um, and it's interesting, as you watch a business analyst get ready for a next level, the prove it metrics are getting less and less data driven and more, the leaders in those businesses just know they can trust them with the hardest work
Hmm.
that's available. And so they give them that work and they get it done. How do you measure the effectiveness of that? Sure, I think you can break down delivery of projects, et cetera. But it's less tangible when it comes to how do we know they're ready. It really
Hmm.
does come down to managers trusting. and giving them experiences of, I'll do, you watch, we'll do together, then you do, I watch, and then they're off and ready to go. That process and the measurement of that is we've become less fussed about it being right and more about it being effective.
So if right now for the learning leaders that are listening to this, if you were to give some tips on how you could try and break out of that maybe efficiency first or overly efficiency driven design
Mhm.
approach and reconnect more with human-centered learning, then what key steps would you recommend that they try and take? If they can't do experiments like these, what could they do,
Right.
for example?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts in mindset, and I'm a huge fan of Trusted Learning Advisor sort of book that's come out with my friend Dr. Keith Keating. That mindset around the most efficient learning experiences are when you're in that mindset of being a trusted advisor with the business. So really getting curious about what is it that the business really needs when they are seeking capabilities, understanding that and getting very effective at delivering on those things is the most efficient way to grow learning's impact in a business. The other thing I would really advocate for is the ability to tell the stories of how people are learning, what experiences are people having, what's working, what's not working in your own environment for that type of growth. And so get very curious about those that are struggling and finding it hard to progress, and those that are being very successful, and really unpack what is differentiating them. We often talk about high performers, low performers, um, really understanding what's making that difference um, in your context is important, because we've seen, for example, in our own environment, really high performers who then go on to another organization end up being mid-level. They're not still high performers. And the unpacking of why is that happening? What is it in the environment that's the perfect mix for that particular individual where another environment is not? The more we understand those things and the human experience, the better we become at designing learning for it.
Mm.
So I think we get very focused on the pedagogy and on our curriculum, curating the right curriculum, et cetera. I think we should get far more curious about the experiences,
Mhm.
not just the education. And that focus on experience and exposure, in addition to the education, and thinking about less, not more, as the way to help people learn and focus. Those are all things I think that we all have power to do in our own, whatever size organization we have,
Yeah.
and do the best we can with those minimal impacts that we can make.
And with that, in that experience, I guess the other E hiding there that for me is really you're talking about environment, right? What's culturally happening, what's happening around them that is beyond whatever you may have provided or given them or they've accessed, which is often what people are looking at is, hey, they did this thing that I made for them, and um, and I'll make some correlation kind of claim that it somehow made some kind of difference.
Yeah.
Usually not followed up months later, to see
Yeah.
what actual impact it had. So yeah, so setting the environment up for success, setting them up to be successful learners in the environment going forward. Because I guess coming back to that principle that you had at the beginning, if all humans are set to grow as long as barriers and blockers aren't in their way, then if you can work out how to create the ultimate environment, then off they'll go, right?
Yeah. Yeah, removing those barriers. I mean, I think it's fascinating that we expect people to go into a classroom and learn something, and in that context, and then
Hmm.
take it from that context and apply it into their previous, where nothing else has changed except they've got some new skills that they're going to put into that system, and expect that they would be able to impact, influence the system as a result of that,
Mm.
rather than trying to recreate as much as we can the experience that they will be using those skills in. So I think we use terms like in the flow of work, or et cetera, but really trying to make sure that people are set up for success of how will they apply this in their context, and having a safe place to practice doing so. Because putting people in a classroom, giving them knowledge, many of our leadership development programs do this. We take them out of their team and their, the day to day of their work, and we put them in a beautiful learning leadership center. They learn together, they explore, and they're fired up and ready to go. And then they're put right back into working with the same people, the same horrible tools, frustrating process, and they're trying to execute. And we find people lose hope in that
Hmm.
construct, and they give up as a
Yeah.
result. But if you could give them that learning experience in the same kind of challenging context through simulations, etc., then they have a much greater chance of applying it when they get into their contexts.
Yeah.
The other thing I would offer is one change we made in Canada in particular to all the learning we deliver is I was very intentional about connecting with if a learner was coming into the to our Deloitte University, that their leader take 30 seconds when that learner returns to work to ask them one question. Just connect and ask them, what did you learn and how can I help you um, over the next little while? Apply that. And
Hmm.
that one question and that set of intentionality does change the environment by which they're coming back in. They've got an advocate, someone who's thinking about and the things that they learned and helping them where they can. That's made a huge difference to the scores we get around people saying they've applied this learning at work. And it's one 30-second conversation for managers, leaders to have with their people when they return. It's
Mm.
small pivots like that that have made a big difference.
And there's so many reports, right, about the difference that it can make, managers it can make to not just learning, but employee engagement and so on, performance. So that the interesting thing about that kind of small conversation, if you like, is that it's not only a continuation of the learning process by allowing someone to talk about what they learn out loud outside in a different
There's the
environment.
repetition. Yeah.
But it shows that support that's there, and ideally then more would happen. But at least it's a small start right in the right direction.
Yeah. If you put juxtaposition, one learner comes back and the leader's like, where were you? We missed you yesterday. Get back to work kind of construct. What would be going on here in your
Mm,
natural state of environment, your brain would basically say, okay, you need to abandon all of that and get
mm,
focus over here versus another learner that comes back. Their leader says, hey, I'm really curious what you learned and how can I help?
mhm,
Sets you on a very different mindset. So it's so stark and obvious, but it happens every day. And we expect then all that investment that we're putting into learning is wasted if
mm,
a leader doesn't have the intentionality of giving their people, when we talk about creating the right environment for learning and the culture of learning, those are small markers that make that kind of difference.
mm. I think the other extreme is like sometimes this happens when leaders will say, "Hey, you've been to a conference or you went to that workshop. Can you write up everything and share it with the team?"
Mhm.
No one really looks at it. No one understands it because it was a different world. It's a different thing.
Yep.
It's not boiled down, and there's no conversation, right? It's
Yeah.
a dumping of someone else's kind of knowledge. So I think
Yeah.
the key with what you're doing is it's kind of what did you learn and how can I help you?
Yeah.
Is the magic
Yeah. It's the
question.
less is more again, right? In
Yeah.
terms of, and yeah, those other people that are listening to you share what you learned. It's probably interesting for a little while, but it's not learning for them.
No.
Uh, Unless there's a nugget that um, of behavioral change or something that you say, this is what I'm going to be doing differently, and I'd
Mhm.
like you to hold me accountable, then people be like, oh, that's interesting,
Mhm.
and would be curious about watching whether that happens, and then watching whether it's something they might want to try.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because
so
obviously the insight someone else shares, they're missing the emotion. They're missing the kind of storytelling that they might have received or heard when it was going on, and they've probably missed the whole conversation that happened around it if it was in a classroom or a social learning environment, right?
yeah,
So yeah, I've worked with leaders who record videos of themselves reporting back on things they've listened to, which is meant to be imparting learning on the rest of the team, and it actually doesn't, and it just takes up time actually.
yeah, and I mean it's good repetition for the person
Yeah.
there's no better way to learn than to teach some of these things. So it's good for them,
Mhm.
but we shouldn't be, it's not the most efficient way of getting people learning, if we want to put it that way, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
it. Spend a lot of time. If time is still the currency of learning, which I believe it is, we spend a lot of people's time listening to other people talking
Mhm.
about what they've learned, which isn't the best use of our time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, given the brain states we were just talking about earlier that are needed.
Yeah.
Um, so you've run various projects and pilots in your time. You've talked about some of the experiments that you've been running in terms of looking at brain states and so on. But I wondered if you could share a failure that maybe taught you the most, and maybe also the flip side of that, which is a success that really proved value, for one of the experiments that you've done.
hmm I think our biggest failure, and we've turned this around, but has always been, in our industry in professional services, there's a regulatory for auditors in particular, and our tax professionals. There's a lot of regulatory learning, um, that if you sit, if you're not in that industry, uh, and we're just curious and wanting to sit in on it, you'd be like, kill me now. I never want to be an auditor because of the fact that that learning is like a death march. It's so dry, and tactical, like it's delivering fact after fact, as opposed to really building and telling a compelling story. So our regulatory learning for many, many years, we, partnered with folks who would deliver it. It had all the content in it, check. In our industry, there were a lot of things, workarounds and cheats that organizations started to see because it was like, I don't want to spend 27 hours a year going through this. I'm going to figure out how to get the right answers on the test as opposed to actually learning the content.
Mhm.
So for many years, we just pounded people through, and it was a forced compliance experience as opposed to a learning experience. And so the minute we stepped back and said, actually, we want people to learn, what would that look like? We started to really rethink what compliance learning could be. And very recently, one of those every year, all of our practitioners have to complete what's called our ethics compliance, which is really re-upping on, what does it mean to be an ethical consultant and what our responsibilities look like, reiterating those. And so the team went about creating what is one of the most compelling. It's like a Telemundo. I don't know if you're familiar with Telemundo stories, but this overly dramatic, emotional story of characters living out a professional day at the firm. And it became like a series of, it was a Netflix series of episodes where you would see what's going to happen next. Will they get caught or not doing this unethical thing? And there was chatter around the firm around these fictional characters and what they were doing and why they would do that, and the relation to their I've seen people do this kind of conversation that was starting to take place because people were learning, what was important and telling the stories themselves about why you would never do that. That's impossible to do here, or etc. And lessons learned. So people were able to pass the exam and had a lot of fun. These watch parties started to happen for compliance learning, which has never been a thing that's happened before. So stepping back from the idea that compliance learning has to be drudgery, um, and just a checkbox activity, and making it so that it can actually be fun and we can learn, in unique ways that
Mm.
aren't traditional. That's been the biggest success for us, is stepping outside of, for example, with chef school, etc., of where, what does this have to do with work? Well, turns out there's been great correlation between those who went to chef school and their compliance scores. Those that went to chef school got a growth mindset and actually enjoyed taking their regulatory training and have had higher completion rates than all those who have not in A/B testing. So there's something to this uh, about being able to step out and do it in a non-traditional way,
That's
and
interesting.
let people have fun.
Yeah, I wonder if good learning gives you an appetite for more, right? As well, like
Yeah, exactly.
literally
It
wakes you
feeds,
up to be able to do it.
yeah, it absolutely feeds our growth mindset, which
Hmm.
again, back to our most natural state. We want to learn and grow. Um, but there are things we need to do to make it, we all want to eat, but if our food was inedible, we would eventually not eat as much as we'd like to eat. And we're insatiable appetite would come in. We will find the things that are appetizing and healthy for us over
Mm.
time.
Okay, love it. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sharing that. I think the failure, as you called it, is really shared by a lot of people. Compliance is often done without thinking, without treating it in the same way that you might do other kind of subject areas for some reason, which is bizarre when it's loads of
Yeah.
ethics and decision making in it. But
Well, there's a regulator watching to see is this done right, and we've worked hard with our regulatory folks to say like being outcome focused in terms of we'll get them to the place where they actually know this, not
mm,
got the right answer on the test, but this is part of now how they think. Isn't that a better outcome than a checkbox of they got the multiple choice answers correct on the test?
yeah, hooray for that.
Yeah.
So we're coming up to the end of our podcast session, but I wanted to ask you, I'm going to try and squeeze in two, but let's start with one. Quick question to close out. So the first is if I gave you a magic wand that you could do anything in the world of learning and development with, what would you do with that magic wand?
Believe it or not, I've been asked this kind of question a lot inside of Deloitte. If I had a magic wand for our leaders in particular, I answer this the same way every time. I still believe I would use that magic wand to give people the gift of self-awareness. Because with self-awareness, all the learning gold that you get is done through a lens of where I need this capability. For example, great feedback or great listening training for someone who says, "Yeah, I'm good at feedback," or "I'm a good listener." Without that self-awareness, you don't engage in the learning seeking to learn. You engage to try to get to it, finish it. And so I think self-awareness gives us that ability to focus our learning on the things that matters most and gives us a real desire to improve once we know who we are and where we're strong and where we have opportunities to develop.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put your magic wand in the post and we'll see how it compares with the Deloitte one. We'll see which one works.
Yeah, there we go.
And this might be impossible to do in a 10 second with a 10-second answer, but if you look at the year ahead, right through to 2026, what's one thing do you think that will be different about your approach or your strategy for learning at Deloitte?
Well, I can't have we can't have a podcast on learning without saying the word AI. So I think in the next 8, 12 months, so many new AI tools are coming on board that we'll just constantly be testing and finding on our journey to sort of optimize the experience for folks. I'm looking forward to AI being much more involved in the experience, and so more to share on that next time we chat, perhaps.
Brilliant. Thank you. So massive thank you to you for joining me today. And it's been really, really interesting to talk to you about your experiments and definitely made me lean in with lots of curiosity. So hopefully we can learn more together by chatting further in the future.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Thanks for the great questions. That's the sign of curiosity right there, right? Good questions.